when computing your expected family contribution, we know that they're going to take 50% if you're above the student income allowance amount. But what about parents? Well, for parents, there is no income allowance amount. They're going to really take from $1 and add that in. Now, this chart shows you the percentages of how they compute your expected family contribution looking at income. And income's the first category we're going to look at. So now we're going to really start capturing and computing what your expected family contribution is. And you should use this chart because, again, in my experience, it's very, very accurate. So for adjusted income for parents, if there's a range between 0 and 25,000, it's an automatic 0% as far as your expected family contribution. Okay, that's an automatic. 25,000 up to 99,000, take about 15% of the number, and that's going to be what they're going to use as the income portion to compute your expected family contribution. 100 to 130,000, take about 20%. 130 to 150,000, 25%, and when you get above 150,000, they're going to take about 30%. Now, are these numbers etched in stone? No. I'm using this based off of my experience in this space over the X amount of years, and what I've seen as far as them coming up with expected family contributions and generating financial aid awards. So, could this be off by a couple percentage points either direction? Sure, just like anything else. But this is, in my opinion, a pretty good guide. So let's just, quick example here. Let's just make it easy. If you have $100,000 as your adjusted gross income as a family, as a parent, all right, well then your starting point for your expected family contribution is going to be $20,000. All right, let's say you have $75,000 as your adjusted gross income as a family. Well then they're going to take 15%, and as a starting point to start coming up with your expected family contribution number as a family, you're going to start with $11,250. Again, the minimum amount that they expect you to pay for college. Okay, this is a key point here. Okay, income is going to play a major role, as will assets, which we'll get to in a second. So, again, don't worry. We're going to go into case studies, and I'm going to walk you through how to compute this, especially in week 3, module 1. So, again, I'm just setting a stage, introducing the topic. If you're kind of following along already as far as the course is structured, I introduce a topic very slowly, kind of get into it, understand the terms, the variables, how it all plays out, and then I kind of go deeper, tie it all together. No difference here in week 2. Started with the broad financial aid equation. Now we're going to microanalyze expected family contribution, and now we're microanalyzing how we compute the expected family contribution. And again, we're starting with the income. So this chart, again, this is something you're always going to come back to, these percentages as far as trying to figure out and forecast what your expected family contribution would be as a family. And parent assets, as you see, once we get above that $15,000 mark, the $15,000 mark is that asset protection allowance amount. Once we get above that amount, it's going to be valued at 6%. Well, what does this mean, Mike? Well, let's say you have $115,000 in non-retirement assets. Why are we looking at only non-retirement assets? Because that's the only ones that are going to count. Retirement assets, they're like they don't exist. So I don't care if your 401k is worth $10 million, it's not going to hurt you. But you have non-retirement assets, and they're valued at $115,000 on the day you fill out the FAFSA form. Well, we subtract out our $15,000 because that's our asset protection allowance. And now we're left with $100,000. Well, similar to the income, we're going to take a percentage of that. We're going to take about 6%. And that's what we're going to add to the number that we came up with when we were looking at the income. So back to my example, let's just use $100,000 again. Let's just say this family, the Jones family, had $100,000 in their adjusted gross income. We took 20% of that, right? Because that's the income amount. So our starting point for expected family contribution was $20,000. Then we moved along and we looked at assets. And we had $115,000 in assets, but we subtracted our asset protection allowance amount of $15,000. Now we're left with $100,000 in non-retirement assets. Again, we're not looking at the 401k or the IRA that's worth $5 million because it doesn't count. But we're looking at that $100,000 non-retirement asset. It could be a mutual fund, let's just say, for argument's sake. We're going to take 6% of it, which is 6,000. Simple math, 100,000 times 6%. And we're going to take 6,000 and we're going to add it to the 20,000 that we came up with from the income. And now our expected family contribution, now we're at 26,000. Okay? Close to that 27,000 I had in that example of the FAFSA form that showed the expected family contribution. All right, so now you're seeing how we're looking at percentages of assets and income and how we're deriving and computing that expected family contribution number.